Very often when we think of rules or commands, the first thing that comes to mind is perhaps being limited in some way, feeling suppressed, not being able to do what we want to do. And yet the 10 Commandments presented in our first reading at Mass today were revealed by God for reasons that are the very opposite. In the book of Exodus, the 10 Commandments were revealed by God to Moses for the very purpose of freedom and happiness. For many years, the Israelites were kept as slaves by the Egyptian pharaohs. Despite their hardships, they clung on to the hope and promise that God would intervene and free them. When Moses led the Israelite people towards the Promised Land, at first they rejoiced in this newfound freedom. They began their journey full of hope and expectation. However, it was not an easy journey, and over the time they began to resent the hardships and began to doubt God's plan. They started to complain. They struggled to see the greater purpose of why they were on this journey. They even started to yearn for the life they once had in Egypt that they had grown accustomed to for so many years. This was their normal. They struggled to recognize that they were on a journey to a greater freedom than they had ever experienced. This journey, although difficult at first, was a necessary one through which God would open their hearts better to an internal freedom, one in which they would enter into a personal, covenantal relationship with the God who loved them, who freed them from oppression, who cherished them, who involved them in his plan of salvation. And yet, when I was reflecting on this reading today, I couldn't help but think about the journey that we have found ourselves on over the past year, in a time when social distancing and isolation have become what many have described as part of a new normal. The freedoms that we took for granted before have been missed by many of us. We can often find ourselves looking back to how our lives used to be in the hope that life will return to normal again. And yet the slowing down, the reprioritisation of goals has brought more sharply into focus those things of great value that perhaps we didn't recognise as well as we should have in our previously normal world. When we read and reflect on the 10 Commandments, we find at their heart their summary: love of God and neighbour. By loving our neighbour, we love God. By loving our God, we love our neighbour. The normal which we had become accustomed to in the past did not always reflect this central teaching in our society. It was not until we experienced a limitation to our freedoms and a series of lockdowns that there was a recognition by many, including myself, of how the fast pace of modern life can slowly enslave us to the point where we don't recognise it until it suddenly creeps up on us, and where we find ourselves in a new and alien situation that feels strange to us. And yet, just as God worked in the hearts of the men and women who came out of slavery in Egypt, he too works in our hearts when life can throw at us many challenges and situations in which we unexpectedly find ourselves. What has emerged from a negative and uncertain situation from last March is the positive and powerful impact that we can have on others when we look out of ourselves to those around us, when we recognise the needs of those we may not have noticed before. The power of action then comes when people rally together in new ways to make a difference. Our present situation can be a time of renewal, a time to slow down and recognise the more important issues in life, spending time with family, connecting with others in new and creative ways, raising issues around social justice and doing something about it, standing up for the dignity and sanctity of human life, whether an unborn child or an elderly person in a care home. Many people have become more acutely aware of their spiritual life with God. In fact, during the first lockdown, there was a 50% surge in online searches for prayer as people turned to religion to cope with feelings of anxiety and hopelessness. What we have witnessed is the human spirit. People from all walks of life come together. We have witnessed individuals, community groups, parishes and sporting organisations create initiatives to reach out to those in need, to distribute essentials to those who could not access them. We have seen an increase in online prayer, services, masses and inspiring talks. In these last few months, we have experienced great changes to our day-to-day life, but much of that change needs to continue. The 10 Commandments, revealed by God to Moses on Mount Sinai, are valid for every person at all times and in all places because they come from God. They open our heart and minds to the wisdom of God's eternal plan for us, to flourish, to become what He intended us to become, and to experience true and authentic happiness and freedom, not only for ourselves, but especially for those around us, within our communities, as we work towards the common good of all. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus, the new Moses, stood on the mount and revealed to us a new law of love, fulfilling the law of Moses. As the 10 Commandments began with "Thou shalt not," the new law of love presented by Jesus begins with the word "blessed." No matter how difficult our journey is, God continues to work in our hearts as His children, as part of the human race, to mould us into a people, to be His presence here on earth, and to be a blessed presence in the life of those who especially need our love and support at this time, whether physically, emotionally, or spiritually, as they too become a blessing for our lives as well. Let us ask God to bless us as we continue on our Lenten journey together, looking towards Easter with a renewed hope and appreciation for God and one another.